And good luck to those of you in the fantasy world determining which of those running backs is going to win on any given Sunday. It will be
Right.
week to week. And so I'm going to skip past the Brandon Ayuk topic and go right into the fantasy aspect of it. And we can touch on Brandon a little bit here when we talk about the wide receivers. I feel as though we covered the idea that he probably was held back a bit because of the disciplinary issues, and that leads into it. There certainly is the lingering issue, but let's just talk about it from a fantasy aspect. The first thing I want to ask you here is, do you see any value, standalone value, in Trey Lance at this point? Or do you think it's a hold him until and if he takes over that starting spot for real fantasy value?
Yeah. So just shameless plug. Also, Rob, after this show at 5:30 on my channel, I actually do what every Wednesday night, a fantasy football show with my friend Casey, who is just like a computer when it comes to fantasy knowledge. So just if any of you guys are into that, please go to my channel after this show if you're interested. But
Little 5:30 plug, 5:30 on
5:30
Suneil's
plug.
channel, Fantasy Football. I will be tuning in because I have 6 lineups that I need to set.
That's awesome. So it depends on the type of league you're in, right? If you're in a dynasty league, clearly you keep him, right? Because
Yes.
he's gonna be a starter next year, hopefully, maybe 2 years, depending on how Jimmy does this year, right? So you definitely want to keep him. Now in a redraft league, which you just have him this year, I don't know if there's that much value at this point. I think you could get a better option for you that's going to play more consistently um, uh, out of some of these other quarterbacks. Like even a quarterback like Kirk Cousins in like these standard leagues is got like 22 points for you. So and so I think that Jimmy is playing well enough to where the he's not going to be pulled out because of bad football. He's only going to be pulled out because of injury. So to me, I don't think Trey Lance is going to get enough run for him to take up a spot on your team in a redraft league.
I think that that's fair. And I would also say it probably depends on your depth, in my opinion. I'm with Josh in that if you need to make some moves at this time, you're probably cutting Lance because he's not going to make any immediate jumps in the next couple of weeks. I think it is fair to assume that you're looking for him to get more and more snaps. I thought I saw something. Yeah, here we go, where we're talking about, I think Lance will start to get more and more reps every week. I agree with that, but I still think he's not going to be fantasy relevant for another month or so. Let's see this next one. Lance is a hold. So that's where I am. If you have a deep team where you've got some scrubs at the end of the bench and you have a quarterback that has a bye later in the year, I'm keeping Lance because I believe in him for second half of the season. If Jimmy gets hurt, he's an automatic start. So to me right now, he's a potential hold. All right.
It also
Moving.
depends on who your starting quarterback is. Because if
Yes.
your starting quarterback is going to outperform Lance, then once again, maybe it's better off grabbing a receiver, grabbing a running back if that's where more of your weaknesses are. Like if I have Patrick Mahomes, what do I care if Trey Lance is on my team, right?
Right.
So yeah, so it kind of depends on what your situation is. I think just as of now, you could probably re-pick him up in a few weeks. I don't think anybody's picking him up right away. So, just keep an eye on him. But like I said, I think Jimmy's looks great, looks healthy. Seems like he's going to be playing most of these games. So
It definitely does at this point in time. When we're looking at running back, the most convoluted position in any Shanahan offense, but
right,
certainly at the injury that we saw and the fact that Trey Sermon wasn't actually active week
uh-huh.
one got a little wonky because in a lot of my drafts, Sermon was going above Mostert because people
Yes.
saw the potential of Sermon and what he might bring down the stretch, in particular fantasy playoffs. How do you see the running back situation shaking out? And would you stash Jeff Wilson?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably not stash Just Wilson because I find it hard he's going to get that much run with the way Mitchell's playing and how I envision Sermon playing. Um, Now, if Sermon comes out and he's not as good as we expect him to be, maybe then I pick up Jeff Wilson because definitely they need a goal line back. It doesn't look like Mitchell is as effective at goal line and the short yardage back. So, but I think right now, I think Elijah Mitchell is probably gone from most leagues at this point after his week 1 performance. I think he
He,
was the most picked up guy on the waiver wire.
yeah, he went for $52 in my FAAB of one fantasy league. I put in a bid at 42 and I was like, I'm overpaying for him. And then someone of their $100 of free agent acquisition budget, they did 52 of 100.
Wow.
Crazy.
Yeah. So, and I do think that Shanahan likes Mitchell a little bit more than Sermon at this point, and it seems like he's going to get a bulk of the carries. I mean, Hasty was there and he didn't really get that many carries compared to Mitchell. I was actually surprised. I thought that they would spread the ball a little bit more, but most of the carries went to Mitchell. So I expect him to still get a lot of play. I think he will out carry even Sermon just because of the production that he has. But like you said, that's a week to week type of thing. Shanahan
It really is.
knows
From one game plan to the next.
Yeah, well, Shanahan is known for just going with whoever the hot hand is. So if Sermon's having a big game, he's going to get the ball. You know, Mitchell was having a big game. They kept giving the ball to Mitchell. So whomever is hot. So it's kind of like hit or miss. I would probably if they're playing early game and you want to start them, make sure you put them in your actual running back position and not the flex position, so that if you don't get the production out of them, you could, move somebody back in there in the flex to kind of save the day.
Right. That's key. That is key. Flexibility in the flex spot.
Yeah.
Josh Mangold, I respect the surge of putting all $200 in on him. I mean, I should have, because I had Mostert in that. The only one league I had Mostert in was that league, and therefore I should have. And I have Sermon, so I could have had the entire backfield. To me, for the running back situation, it stays the same as I had before, but now I've replaced now I have replaced Mostert with Mitchell. So I believe Mitchell is the guy to have for the first half of the season and Sermon for the back half of the season. So I'm buying low on Sermon right now, because you're going to have a bunch of people, in particular, if he doesn't get a lot of touches this week, that are going to want to bail on Sermon. Take advantage of that if you have a couple of lower spots on your roster where you can stash him for the second half of the season. All right, moving right along, receivers. Is Debo a bona fide stud?
Absolutely. I mean, the chemistry with him and Jimmy G seems to be his favorite receiver. I mean, he was only targeting him, right, throughout the whole game. Debo seems healthy. His ball skills seem better. His adjustment to that underthrown ball. There's been a debate. Was it underthrown? Was it that? Was he aiming for that part? But anyways, right. Debo made a play on the ball to be able to make that
yes,
catch.
He did.
He still has he's still part of the Yak Bros, and showing that. And we haven't even seen him in the jet sweep game as much as we expect. He had a couple in that game, but I still think there's another level of this offense that Debo's a part of, that, like you said, because it was Detroit, I don't think Shanahan even showed. So even though he might not continue to get 180 yards as far as passing game, like that might go down, but you still have him as the rushing attack. You still have him, to be able to get touchdowns in the red zone, things like that. So I'm absolutely 100%. There's no way he's on the waiver wire. He was drafted
no
for
way.
Sure. But he is somebody that I am starting at receiver, depending on, who my other receivers are as well, obviously.
Yeah, this one I saw coming. I saw Debo as the greatest value in that 100 to 120 pick range. I was floored that he was going there because of the yards from scrimmage aspect. That he may just be a 1,000-yard receiver or slightly below that, but when you factor in the yards he's going to get from scrimmage in the rush game, to me, it's that 12 to 1,400 yards from scrimmage range for Debo, and that's ridiculous value for where he was going. I managed to scoop him up in 5 of 6 leagues, and he is a starter for me on a weekly basis until he proves otherwise. I have some doubts about Brandon Ayuk as far as a fantasy perspective, whether you can count on him week to week. And so for me, within the receiving game, for the wide receivers specifically, the only one that's consistent for me is Debo. Now, when you talk about pass catchers and you go into tight end, Kittle is a week to week starter, no question about it. But when you look at where he was drafted in fantasy football drafts and the lack of touchdowns he has historically produced, and it would seem is going to be unable to produce this year as well, if we're judging by one game, which would be a little irresponsible of us.
Right.
But it does strike me that we haven't found the key to unlocking him in the red zone. And if we don't, to me, the value for Kittle just wasn't there to draft him. Obviously, if you have him, though, you're starting him every week. A bigger question mark to me is the defense. That makes for a little bit more of an interesting dialogue. So when you look at the defense, because I was projecting potentially a top 5 defense, what do you see? Is this something that you're holding on to the 49ers defense in fantasy, or are you skeptical now?
No, I'm still holding on because if you look at the pick six, none of that had anything to do with the DBs, right? It had everything to do with the defensive line and the linebackers. And I think that most of these interceptions and turnovers are going to be stemmed from pressure from the defensive line and opportunistic play from the DBs, the safeties, and the linebackers. So nobody on the defensive line, obviously Kinlaw, but as far as pass rushing, nobody on the defensive line is injured. Everybody's still healthy. We're still completely intact there. So until there's like a huge loss in the defensive line, knock on wood, that we won't see at all this season. If Bosa's there, Ford's there, Ebicom's there, Armstead's there, I still think that this is a dominant defense because once again, that is what makes our defense dominant. It's not our safeties. It's not our cornerbacks. It's not even though we have all pro Fred, it's not even our linebackers. It's the defensive line. So as long as that defensive line is intact, our defense is just where it needs to be.
That makes me feel a little bit better. I think that's where I am. I'm still emotionally attached to what happened on Sunday and the scare that really shook me a bit toward the end of it. Admittedly, while I was watching the game, I never thought it was in question. I never thought we were going to lose it, but it did give me trepidation about how good this defense really is. But you're making a solid point there, which is one I have said continually, which is that we build through the defensive line. And until there is something amiss with the defensive line, if we continue to see struggles there, if we can't stop the run game, if Kinlaw comes back and that doesn't improve our run defense, maybe I'll shift my opinion. But I think we still have the potential to be a dominant defense. And I thought that the value for the 49ers in drafting their defense was phenomenal. Therefore, I have them in several leagues, and all of my friends call me a homer for doing so, and probably rightfully so.
Which you are.
Indeed. 100%. All right.